Chapter 46, The Webs of Fate. The Webs of Fate.
Come, this way.
Frithas spared a glance to the gnome hurrying before them, his feet scuffing softly over the stone flags, and almost lost to the clatter of those that followed him. The temple was deserted, but that did not stop her watching every shaded alcove and fluttering curtain. There was no room for error now. The camp outside had been empty. Findel's predictions that the mercenaries would retreat back to guard the quarry and the only entrance to the Underdark they knew had proved correct, it seemed, and they had slipped through the now abandoned break in the wall at the back of the temple unnoticed.
Here, it is down these steps.
Fritha had the lead as they followed the gnome down into the darkness. The large door they finally reached ajar and allowing a thin sliver of light as a beacon, Fendel pushing it wide as he reached it. For all she could have expected, the room was quite unremarkable, just a plain sandstone chamber a dozen yards square and seemingly untouched by the decay that had ruined the temple above. Tall oil lamps burned in each corner, throwing a steady yellow light upon the doorway opposite and the rough stone passage beyond. It was gated, though the iron railings hung open, as though that last person through had been in too much of a rush to see it properly closed, the only allusion to decoration in the whole room found in the simple border of symbols that had been carved into the frame.
Wards,
murmured a gnomon, letting a finger trace one,
though long faded.
Fendel had the lead once more, though he was hardly needed as a guide now. There was only one passage and Frithas saw no turnings in her bobbing ware light. They walked for what felt like an age, though it was likely only a good quarter hour, the girl having to resist the urge to push past the gnome and break into a run. If they were too late. The gnome suddenly quickened his pace, and Fritha momentarily considered that perhaps he had sensed her impatience when she noticed something change in the air and, at last, they were out, the group stepping onto a narrow precipice that hung in the darkness. The cavern they had come to was vast. Fritha could see neither roof nor the opposite wall, her eyes following the precipice they were standing upon around the sloping wall at their backs to another, larger shelf of rock 100 yards or so away, the black mouth of a second passage open on the cliff face behind. She gazed at it a moment longer, her mind slowly coming to the realization that she should not be able to see that either in just the meager glow of their ware lights when Fendel broke through her reverie.
There,
hissed the gnome, pointing to the edge just before them,
it is down. Whoa!
Gasped Imoen, Fritha stepping forward as she did, and the source of the light was suddenly laid bare. There below them, a huge stone edifice rose from the darkness, its plain grey walls aglow with light from 100 windows. It had been built on a large rock plateau, a bridge spanning a few hundred yards between it and the cavern wall, while underneath the ground teemed with tiny figures, the grey peaks of tents breaking through the throng.
There,
breathed Fendel,
that is where we will find your ally and my kin. We are stood now at the top of a fracture that runs for over a league and right down into the heart of the Underdark. And what is that over there?
Asked Valigar, nod sent to the shelf opposite.
That passage leads up to the quarry, a shorter route to the surface, but one, as we know, is guarded. From there you can see the steps which lead down to the fortress.
And thanks to the light from the fortress, Fritha could, the set of stairs carved into the wall itself and snaking down to another narrow rock plateau that seamlessly merged into the fortress bridge.
The Duergar mercs and their slaves which make up Sendai's forces down here hold camps at the base of her fortress and upon similar plateaus all the way down the fissure. We need a plan,
said Jahara firmly. A gnomon was peering over the edge with a frown, casting his eye across the torch-lit bridge and the few figures that were standing on guard upon it and amongst the crates and barrels they seemed to use the place to store.
We could likely take the bridge with a surprise attack. And what about the army camped below?
Asked Imoen.
The only way onto the bridge is either through the fortress or up a set of steps,
provided Fendel quickly.
You cannot see them from here, they have been cut into the cavern wall on the other side of the bridge. It would take time for a force that size to mobilize,
assured Anomen.
We could take the bridge and be inside before they reach us. And then what?
Pressed Imoen. It seemed she had had her fill of being sent into danger unprepared.
The doors are usually kept open to allow the slaves to move the supplies from the fortress onto the bridge, ready for transport to the surface. Sendai allows only a few slaves, her bodyguards, and a handful of others to be housed within the fortress itself.
Offered Fendel.
If we get inside and bar the doors behind us, it would take a while before the army reached the upper levels. We could make our rescue without meeting any great resistance.
Fritha tried to weigh the risks against their limited options, all the while fighting to ignore the writhing pull to be down there, to be racing to his side.
Yes, that could work. Once we're inside, Minsk and Valigar can hold the doors, the rest of us can go with Fendel and find Solafane. And what about Sendai?
Everyone seemed to stop at Imoen's question. In spite of everything, Fritha could not help but smile, grim and war-weary.
We will leave that up to fate.
Everything hurt, and yet even so it was not merely an all-encompassing ache. He was so aware of every agonizing detail. The sharp pain that stabbed with every breath from his cracked chest, the throbbing tightness as the blood dried in the cuts upon his face, the fire that raged in his extended arms, rich accents above the dull ache of his whole body. The two men had beat him until he had fallen unconscious again, and he had awoken to find himself being healed by a male drow, a priest of Gonador by his look, the sick green light that emanated from his hands tingling unpleasantly even as he felt the flesh it touched knit. The priest grinned, giving his tender abdomen a spiteful slap as he finished, and it was only then Solafane realized his chest was bared, the tunic he had brought from Suldanisseller removed while he was unconscious. The thought made his stomach squirm. The two humans were gone and, as the priest moved past him, Solafane fought the urge to cast about for the orchestrator of his torture.
Mistress, he is ready. Good.
The deliberate click of her heels upon the stone tiles advanced from behind him, the woman sashaying into his peripherals, though her focus was not on him, but the large set of shelves but a few paces to his left. Solafane focused on the lingering pain, using it as he had been taught, desperate to ignore the chime of glass at his side, Sendai's voice soft and teasing as she pored over the rows of bottles that lined the wall.
Our people would deny it, but we can learn from the surfacers. The drow think themselves the masters of torture. We create tentacle rods to cause pain unimaginable, starve others at but a whim and punish any beneath us in retaliation for the torments we must face from those above, but our ways are usually so sterile, nothing that would permanently mar a slave's, or male's, worth. Ah, this one, I think.
She turned at last, a large glass bottle in hand, the pale green contents glowing unnaturally in the lamplight. Solafane fought the urge to thrash vainly back from her.
Few understand that it is the fear for the body, fear of the useless lump of bloody flesh that will be left afterwards that is half the torture in itself. But you understand, do you not?
Tapering fingers removed the stopper, the glass plug held above his chest, and he watched the lingering liquid which clung to it slowly pool in the lowest corner, the droplets swelling until its own weight freed it. It hit his flesh like a bullet of fire, his scream fading long before the pain to leave him panting in the reek of his own burnt flesh. Sendai smiled, pleased with the effect.
Now, tell me who sent you.
Solafane said nothing, unable to help but writhe back from her as the bottle was raised above him again. He did not understand how she could bear to stand so close, his scream was deafening.
Who sent you?
She did not even wait for the screaming to stop that time. The smell of burnt flesh was stomach-churning.
Give me their names.
Sendai waited for his screams to fade, regarding him as he panted roughly, the 4 lesions weeping on his chest, all blood burnt away to leave only a gooey mess of flesh that opened to the bone. Slowly, a smile graced her thick features, the woman sending a nod to the male behind him.
Take his arm down.
She lingered over the word like a caress.
His sword arm.
The priest obeyed her in silence, the relief that flooded his freed arm tempered with the growing dread as the male forced it out, both hands about his forearm to prevent it being pulled back. Sendai took a step towards his flexing hand, the bottle held titled above it so the bright green liquid hung upon the lip of the mouth.
Tell me who, or I will empty this bottle and leave you to watch as your hand dissolves away to a useless stump.
A drop landed on his open palm, pain searing along the entire limb. Another drop and then another, the screams did not even sound like him anymore.
Tell me now.
The image of Valigar flashed behind his eyes, the man cradling that clawed lump of flesh. Solifane was screaming so, he barely had breath left for her answer.
The silver chalice. What?
Sendai cried, voice trembling with incredulous laughter as the bottle was at last withdrawn.
Those knights who cannot even find me, how many of their patrols have they lost trying?
Solifane's breathing was ragged, his seared chest heaving.
They concluded the same. They hired me, a fellow drow, to succeed where they could not. Yes, they did not realize you are a half-blood mongrel.
The slap to his face was almost friendly.
Now we are getting somewhere. How did they contract you?
Solifane kept panting, feigning the diminishing need for breath. Being unconscious had not given him much time to ponder his next tale.
The chalice met with an envoy of elves after the Battle of Saradush. I was among them. Which elves?
She barked, with a casual punch to his abdomen.
From where? Ah. From Suldaneseller. I live in the city, as a convert to Illustrae.
That drew a smile from the woman.
So, we have a worthless convert to the Dark Maiden before us. It seems we were not the only ones to turn from Lolth.
The male next to him gave an appreciative snort as Sendai added,
and the girl with you? A fellow from the chalice sent to ensure I did not betray them. They do not fully trust my kind. Interesting,
Sendai pondered idly,
but is it the truth? You see, Malfinder here is my spy master. Malfinder, has the chalice hired any drow, any assassins at all, over the last 3 months?
Solifane could hear his grin.
No, mistress, our agents have made no such report.
Sendai's smile took on a snarling edge, those long fingers snapped again about Solifane's tender jaw.
You think me a fool? I think you are afraid.
She struck him so hard he almost bit through his own tongue.
I fear nothing. Not the drow, not the matrons, not even Lolth. It took bravery to turn from the Spider Queen,
he pressed, an insane disregard for the consequences surging through him.
But are you any freer now? Open your heart and Illustrae will.
A punch to his diaphragm saw the rest lost to wheezing, Sendai throwing her arms wide with a wild laugh.
Illustrae is doing for you now, what she did for me, nothing. Where was your goddess when I spent decades cowering in abuse and torment? Where was she when I was a half-blood slave kept alive only on a whim for the magic I possessed? I hope my matron appreciated the irony when I used it to slaughter her and destroy that pathetic house. It was as my mother said before they dragged her to the altar, I was never meant to hide down there, but to rule it. And after I ascend, the drow will tremble before me, Bal's favored general. And as for you, I'll stray.
Sendai snarled, her face an inch from his, fingernails scoring his cheeks as she held his jaw fast.
I will break you down here, and you will never see the light of your beloved surface again. Now tell me who sent you.
She released him at last, and Solafane dropped his head, closing his eyes to shut out that room. The pain was too much to focus upon, and he fell back into the only solace he knew.
Mistress, he is whispering.
About him, two presences pressed in, trying to catch the breathless muttering. The air split with an almighty shriek.
He is praying. You will beg her for death when this is through. Malfinder, the scourge, I expect to hear his screams in my chambers. Get down!
Yelled Imoen. Fritha dived for cover, the crate she had left behind exploding in the hail of splintered wood as a bolt of energy struck both it and the advancing Duergar guard.
Watch your casting! I'm trying. Press on, we need to reach the doors. Minsk, at your flank.
The Rashami whirled at Jahara's shout, just catching the blade that would have found his back, though he could do little else, Fendel springing from behind a barrel to skewer the dwarf.
Sigahan take you, filth! Everyone, keep moving!
They had managed to edge down the steps in stealth and had remained unnoticed until the very last flight, one of the Duergar at the end of the bridge turning from the crate he had been examining at just the wrong moment. He sounded the alarm with a shout that was lost to screaming as Imoen's fireball engulfed him and they had stormed onto the bridge in an explosion of flames to take the dozen deep dwarves on guard by complete surprise. Only 3 dwarves remained now, 2 turning to run in vain from the spell Imoen had hurled after them, Valigar facing off against the last to cut him down with a brutal slash to the face.
I think that was the last of them,
he gasped. Anomen cast a glance over the bridge's wall to confirm all their fears.
We've been noticed, the other mercenaries are mobilizing below. Never mind that,
screamed Fritha, suddenly springing into a dead run.
They're closing. Quick, get to the doors.
She reached them in time to slam furiously into impenetrable iron.
Hell's teeth! Is there another way inside?
Cried Jahara. Imoen hurled a blazing ball of fire from the ramparts.
The others are coming. We need to go. No one is leaving.
Snapped Fritha. Valigar had already pounded back to the other end of the bridge, skidding to a halt before the steps, shield raised and ready to face the advancing tide of warriors.
Whatever you plan, decide now.
Fendel's voice came hesitant in the growing tempers.
There might be a way.
Fritha jerked to him.
What? It would be dangerous, and would need an agile frame. Just tell me. Over there,
he croaked, hurrying to point over the crenulated wall.
A molding runs along the side of the bridge and onto the wall of the fortress itself. Someone could edge along with me on their back and I could unlock a window and lead us both to our friends.
A heartbeat to consider it and Fritha dropped to a crouch.
Yes. Here, climb on.
Jahara had joined them, the woman suddenly frantic.
Fritha, no, you cannot do this. You may reach Solafane, but how do you plan to get out again?
A curt nod to the doors as Fritha straightened, Fendel now clinging to her back.
Through there.
Minsk was beside himself, the Rashami joining his voice to the druids.
No, young Fritha, you walk into death. She walks the only path there is if you wish to rescue your ally.
Proclaimed Fendel over her shoulder.
This fortress was built with over a dozen secret exits. From one of the middle levels, a hidden ladder runs down along the building and past the edge of the plateau. It was how I first made my escape, and it leads to a ledge in the rock that runs back to the stairs we first came down. Once my kin are released, we will all fight our way through the fortress and escape as one.
Minsk was shaking his head, unconvinced, and for the first time since Amkithran, Jahara looked close to Tears.
Fritha, please, I understand, but... No, you don't.
Fritha burst out, not angry but desperate.
Not him, Jahara, they can have anyone but him. I promised myself he'd have a future, that he wouldn't have followed in vain. I need one happy ending from all this, one success. It can't all be for nothing. It will be if you both die down here.
Snapped Imoen. But Fritha just turned from them, suddenly calmed as the weight of her words sunk upon her.
If I cannot return with him, then perhaps it is better I do not return at all. Hold them here for as long as you can, then retreat back to the surface.
Anomen looked wild.
We will not abandon. I've made my decision. The rest of you need to survive to stop Melissan.
Fritha hopped up to sit upon the wall, a sheer drop into the darkness swimming on the other side as her eyes found that ledge, barely wide enough for her booted foot. She could not help but take one last glance to the others, perhaps the last chance she would ever have, her friends arrayed upon the bridge, worn and worried just as she had left them so many times before.
I'm sorry, for everything. Be safe.
Fritha clung to the window ledge above with fingers that had long ago gone numb, the disturbing sense that she could not feel herself gripping and could, in fact, be letting go without knowing, making her cling to it all the tighter.
Not much further,
murmured Fendel at her ear.
I suppose you are lucky Sendai kept me half-starved.
Fritha could make no reply, the girl more than occupied shuffling her feet slowly along the ledge below without looking down at the dizzying drop that awaited any wrong move, the sounds of the fight she had left clashing against the stone before them. Hesitantly, she reached for the next window ledge, a panicked instant spent groping on air until her hand found the shuttered frame. In the corridor beyond, bodies were running back and forth, perhaps he'd some unheard call to arms, and Fritha painfully inched her way past another 3 windows before Fendel finally called her to a halt.
Here, this one sounds empty. Keep still while I open the shutters.
Fritha pressed her body to the cold stone as though it too would cling to it if it could, her stomach lurching as Fendel clambered roughly onto her shoulders. A scrape of the blade he had looted, and suddenly his weight was gone and Fritha was groping up over the window ledge to haul herself inside. The room he had found was a decent size, easily holding 6 short beds and a few chests. Fritha scanned about it, merely glad of the distraction as she waited for her trembling heart to calm. The furnishings were so basic as to serve either slaves or soldiers, the height of ceiling, door, and window leaving her in no doubt as to the fortress's original architects. Fendel was already at the door opposite, small grey head pressed to the wood as he strained to listen through it.
Is it far?
She murmured, at last ready to speak.
No, not far. The cells are 3 floors down.
Satisfied, Fendel pulled ajar the door to check the corridor and quickly beckoned her after him.
This way.
The hallway outside was empty, the pair tearing along it and down the next.
There should be some stairs just.
Fendel darted back from the next corner, but it was too late. Fritha did not understand what the 2 Duergar were shouting, but her sword had their reply.
Hell's teeth!
She cursed to the nearest corpse. Fendel would not even spare it that.
We must go. When they find the bodies we will be searched for.
Down the coiled staircase they clattered and deeper into that maze. Fritha could barely tell one grey, torch-lit hallway from another. After a while, every door they passed set with the same plain wood. Fendel had the lead, the gnome pausing at each corner, haste tempered with caution, and they made their way down 2 further floors without meeting another soul.
Here,
he gasped finally, stopping at a stout door that looked little different from any of the others they had passed.
The cells are through here.
He cocked an ear to the wood.
There is movement on the other side.
Fritha took a step back and let light fingers rest upon the handle.
Then prepare for a fight.
4 Duergar guards turned at sound of the door. The nearest did not even have chance to cry out. A single leap took Fritha into their midst, one cut down as she landed, his brother run through as he fumbled for his sword. The remaining 2 had fallen back, weapons before them, Fritha kicking aside a shield to leave him open for Fendel, while the other was cut down with a slash to the face. And save for them, the cramped, 3-sided room was empty once more, the 2 walls that came to an apex before them, each lined with 3 grill-set doors.
Hello!
Came the tentative cry. Fendel was already fussing at his pockets.
It is Fendel, I have returned. Just a moment, I will pick the locks.
Fritha left Fendel to his task, the girl flitting from door to door to peer through the grill of each, another 2 occupied by gnomes, the last holding a dead Duergar.
Solafane? He's not here. No.
Came Fendel's voice behind her, firm and slightly sad, Fritha whirling to take in that bowed countenance, his freed kin gathered behind him, gazing up at her with pebble-like, black eyes.
Sendai will be torturing him. Her chambers are 2 floors above us.
The word came hoarse in her disbelief.
What? You knew this? Then you have to help me reach him, I need you to show me the way out.
Slowly, Fendel shook his head.
No, I am sorry, but we are not warriors. In the chaos you have wrought, none will notice a few more slaves, my kin will make their escape in a stealth you could not hope to imitate. Forgive me.
Shouts rang a long corridor behind her. Fritha hardly registered them in her rage.
You.
She was trembling, the bloody haze descending again as she raised her blade, while Fendel merely held his ground, stoically waiting for the blow. No one spoke, his fellows about him watching in silent acceptance. Inside, the blood screamed, demanding its vengeance, and it would taste it. Fritha tore herself from him with all the will she possessed, a roar worthy of Minsk bellowed along the hallway they had just fought down as she hefted her blade and broke into a run. Solafane kept his head down, ignoring the sporadic drip from his bloody back. He did not know when he heard it, the distant clash of fighting, only that the sound began to creep through his prayers mere moments before Sendai had burst into the room. The woman had snatched the whip from Malfinder and dismissed the male, her rage instantly vented upon him, though she barely landed a proper blow in her blind anger, and the frame he was locked to bore the brunt. Sendai had seemed to realize the same at length, the woman stepping back, and she was still out of sight now, somewhere behind him, her breath coming heavy as she fought to restore her air of the unruffled torturer. His quiet laughter started her, the woman stepping into his peripherals.
You find something amusing, worm. Look at you, he croaked, you rage and curse and let all see your failure when even a child would know to keep such outbursts hidden.
But to his surprise, it was Sendai's turn to laugh.
Fool! How long have you lived up there? Months? Years? The drow hold you still.
She snorted pityingly,
keeping yourself checked when you should be savoring every moment of rage and passion you would have once been forced to suppress. You have wasted the life you had up there, and now it is too late and your allies' pathetic attempts at a rescue will shortly be at an end.
She looped the scourge she held about his neck and began to pull it tight.
Along with my patience. Tell me, who sent you? I was sent.
The pressure was crushing his throat, Sendai's eyes bulging eagerly as she watched him struggle for breath.
Emily-san. What?
The pressure was instantly released. Cellophane gulped at the air like a drowning man.
She is killing all the 5.
Sendai's face was alive in her triumph.
I knew it. That bitch. She claimed only to help us, but I knew it. Blamed their deaths on some faceless ballspawn from the north. From the beginning, she worked on us, divided us by our own ambitions, she wanted us weak. Who does she work for? Who's behind this?
The whip was back, closing about his throat. Cellophane would have told her anything in the grip of that panic.
No one. She seeks the throne for herself. You think me a fool? She is not of the blood. Who is behind it?
He just managed to choke out the word.
Emily-san. And who is that? Another of the children. No, that is her true name,
he gasped.
Emily-san, High Priestess of Baal, the greatest of the Deathstalkers, and she can take the throne just as any Baalspawn could. She will betray her lord and leave Baal dead.
He did not even know where this tale was going anymore, the desire to talk and still draw breath prevailing against any reason.
I am part of a team she sent to kill the others. Ilisira fell first in the forests of the Wealdeth. Then came Saradush. You lie.
Sendai snapped, finger stabbed into a wound on his chest for good measure.
The mage, Imoen, killed Yagashura, they even call her the savior of Saradush. And who took the enchantment from his heart? Who even knew of it outside of the 5? Melisande sent us. Abizagal was next. We stormed his stronghold in the Agazara.
Sendai stepped back, raising her chin in defiance of the news.
And now she comes for me. Where is she? Where is Melisande now? I do not know,
he confessed.
I was to take news of my success here back to the desert. It is there her generals raise an army of jinn and dragons. And what of Balthazar?
She demanded.
Does he ally himself with that viper?
Cellophane blinked.
Balthazar. Do not play the fool with me, I know he raises an army to destroy me. Why else would I need my own? He is in league with her, isn't he? Both waiting to betray the other after I am removed.
The door forestalled any answer he could have made, a drow male bursting through to dip a panicked bow.
Mistress. Forgive me, but you are needed.
The dwarf swung low, Valigar taking the blow on his shield to leave the warrior open for Minsk's blade, his body shoved carelessly over the side by his fellows as another stepped up to fill his place. A no-man drove his shield into the pair before him, and here and there along the steps, men lost their place in the swarming mass of bodies and plummeted from the stairs. If it had not been for that choke point, they would have been overwhelmed in moments, and the 3 men had worked together since to hold that army back. Those dwarfs pressed behind prevented from making a concerted push forward by the constant barrage of spells and crates being hurled by Jahara and Imoen from the bridge above.
Watch the flanks!
Valigar roared.
Imoen, send over more fire. I'm working as fast as, oh.
At the end of the bridge, the huge doors into the fortress had opened, and in the pale flicker of the torchlight within stood a cotter of 6 drow warriors. Imoen summed the group's feelings up in one hissed expletive.
Fuck.
Valigar voiced the conclusion no one else could.
It is time we left, Imoen. But, young Fritha and Cellophane!
Shouted Minsk, sending a dwarf plunging into the darkness with a well-placed swing.
We cannot leave without them.
The three men looked to Jahara, their unbiased conscience in this. The druid squared her shoulders to the burden.
She made her decision, Minsk. Mon.
The girl took a step back from the wall, hands flexing as the energies she had held back were slowly given release.
Right then.
She raised her hands, the dark green light about them intensifying, and even the dwarfs on the steps seemed to pause in their battle to watch her. At any moment, that portal would disunder the darkness above them. Valigar watched with a tightening stomach, struggling against the urge to join Jahara on the bridge as the drow closed upon them. Any moment now. Imoen stooped so quickly at first he thought she had collapsed, glowing green palms slammed into the cobbles at her feet to buckle the stonework. It began gradually, a tremble to the air that slowly rose to a thunder, the low rumbled groan of some enraged giant. The bridge beneath had begun to quake, the fractured stonework already crumbling away into the darkness.
What did you do?
Cried Jahara, her voice trembling along with the rest of them. Imoen was casting about above, as frantic as the druid.
I don't know, I was only aiming to collapse the bridge. Fool girl! How do you think this fissure formed? The earth here is unstable.
The drow were in chaos, stumbling and cursing each other as they made to retreat over the collapsing stonework. Across what little of the cavern they could see, huge cracks were opening, rocks breaking from the walls and roof to plummet through the darkness. Half the dwarfs were trying to flee the falling rubble, those fixed to stay or who did not retreat fast enough trampled by the rest. A rock the size of a pavilion smashed through the upper flight to scatter any remaining into the depths.
Come on, Vals!
Imoen urged. The man had lingered until sure there would be no pursuit. The others were just ahead of them at the steps, Jahara in the lead and halfway up that first narrow flight.
Quickly! I do not know how long, get back!
Valigar just saw the druid flatten herself to the wall behind as the boulder plummeted past her, instinct grabbing Imoen and throwing his wooden buckler above them for all the good it should have done. A flash and stone shards were raining down to rattle upon his shield, the pair left panting in the settling dust.
Imoen? Are you hurt?
The girl just shook her head, transfixed by something above her, and it was only after a moment he realized it was him, the faint blue aura of magic still lingering about his clawed hand. Slowly he lowered the shield. He honestly did not know what to say.
Imoen? Valigar? Are you all right?
Imoen stared at him for as long as the moment would allow, her thousand questions swallowed, and her hand was suddenly gripping that cursed arm for a hardening squeeze.
Come on, we need to go.
The Duergar tried to dodge, his fellows too packed in behind to allow for the movement, and Fritha cut him down while he hesitated. Movement to her left. She caught the axe sweep, smashing the dwarf in face to run him through, another of his brothers stepping over the body to take his place in the circle that pressed her, just as more dwarves rounded the corner at the end of the corridor. Fritha kicked a nearby shield away, skewering the dwarf behind it. More were coming, many more, the girl reaching inside and trying to harness the last of the rage that was fading within her. A sting in the back of her leg. Fritha whirled to cleave the offending dwarf's arm clean from his body along with his bloodied sword, the distraction enough to open her flank for another blade. She parried the blow, just catching another to her right. The circle was closing about her and the anger flared once more. She would not die there for nothing. She refused. Somewhere above them, the thunder of angry stone that seemed to alarm the surrounding dwarfs far more than her. The corridor had begun to shake, and outside screams echoed against the stone. Through the nearest window, she could see shapes rushing past in the dark, the scene suddenly opened in an explosion of rubble as a shard of rock the size of a card tore away the outside wall and the Underdark was laid before them in roaring blackness. Fritha did not wait to see any more, the girl already passed the fleeing dwarves and tearing down the crumbling passage, the blood knew the way and for once she heeded it. The quaking room was unheated about him. Solafane held his breath, ignoring the gentle chime of the trembling bottles, his eyes closed to the flickering lamplight as he fought to summon the last of his strength for the rescue that was coming. It would be soon, he would have to run. As the thought struck, so did the moment, the door exploding open and Sendai stalked inside, fear and anger blazing in those red eyes. A drow bodyguard and one of the higher-ranking mercenaries had hurried in after her, though their reluctance could not have been more obvious, the pair lingering before the doorway eager to be away.
"Mistress, the cavern is collapsing, we should escape."
Sendai ignored the drow, a hand thrown to Solafane and her fury was expressed in one baleful shriek.
"You!"
Hands were suddenly on him, one clawed within his hair as the other struck his face with every word.
"What is happening?"
Solafane could feel the smile curling his bloody mouth, he sighed her name like a prayer.
"Fritha." "What?" "Bane's arse, woman,"
snapped the merc.
"Just kill him and let's go."
But Sendai was held rapt, the woman not even sparing a glance back as the two men cut their losses and fled without her.
"She is coming, Sendai." "Fritha, enslaver of dragons, leader of the five, chosen of Baal."
Sendai had released him, the woman whirling to throw her accusations at the empty room.
"You make no sense. This woman is no member of the five, the dragons were Abazigals. She found me in the darkness, I had all any male could ask for there, but it was not enough. She brought me here, to lands where I have nothing and it means everything. They were just rumors, of a Baal spawn from the north. Some of the others believed it, but I knew it was merely a plot, a tale of Melisand's to keep us paranoid and diverted, someone to blame for the deaths that she had caused. Ilisira, Yagashura, Abazigal. She was not real."
Solafane just managed a pitying laugh, all breath and gurgling blood.
"You've been hiding away in this forest for so long and missed so much, and now it is too late."
The woman swelled, hysterical with rage as she beat any part of him she could reach.
"I hide from no one. I will never hide again. That is enough."
That voice, both command and promise, and there she was, standing in the trembling doorway, a vivid blot of color against the bilious, sallow stone. Fritha had come for him. For them both. Sendai had whipped about, fury dissipated to sheer amazement as she found her there, and Fritha took in every detail of that plain, yet imperious countenance. Solafane was half hidden behind Sendai's stocky frame, and she was glad for the numb throb of the countless battles it had taken to get there as she caught a glimpse of his battered face.
"Who?"
breathed the woman, the horror dawning behind her eyes.
"Not Fritha."
Fritha merely nodded and Sendai seemed for a moment lost to her own disbelief, her face crumpling with the cry.
"No. No. You were a tale. Another of Melisand's lies."
Fritha raised her chin, the sight of Solafane was slowly working on her, worming past that war-weary fugue to stir her anger. With deliberation she ran a hand along her blade, leaving upon the dead metal an aura of flaming blue.
"I am her truth, drow."
Sendai drew her sword with a defiant snarl, in her hand a globe of green energy flared.
"Come then. I am not dead yet."
A heartbeat and they sprang to life, Sendai hurling her spell as Fritha dived clear, the bolt sundering the table behind to scatter the knives upon it in a deadly hail. Sendai was already upon her, sword aloft, and Fritha just straightened to parry the blow. The drow's counter-attack awkwardly deflected as Sendai danced back from the glowing coals that suddenly strewed her path, Fritha toppling the brazier between them. Another spell arced across the room. Fritha caught it on her blade, the magics dissipating in a blaze that resounded with the clash as their swords met, and for a time they traded blows, each sweep matched and countered. Sendai was the stronger, and likely the more skilled, but Fritha was fast, every move anticipated, and it was an advantage the drow clearly wished to cripple. Fritha parried a sweep to her shoulder, their blades locking at the hilt as Sendai closed the distance between them, and the girl was suddenly caught, unable to retreat without leaving herself open. Sendai smiled, she had cornered her against the remains of the broken table, the stronger woman forcing Fritha back towards the upright rack of iron spikes that had been leant against the wall behind. She struggled to resist, knives sent skidding over the flags as her feet fought for purchase, that brief glance down all the distraction Sendai needed. Pain exploded in her face, and back in the same instant, the drow suddenly forcing their locked blades down to lay Fritha open for a vicious headbutt that saw her meet the spikes behind. Hot blood was gushing over her chin, her vision filled with stars. Another blow would finish it, and Fritha could feel the searing wetness of her back as she braced for what was to come. Sendai drew back her head and crack. The drow's cry was muted by the gurgled spray of blood, the full force of her headbutt impacting onto the top of Fritha's skull as the girl dropped her head at the last instant, to flatten the woman's nose and upper lip into a bloody pulp. Sendai staggered back, disorientated and half-blinded by blood, and Fritha lunged for her, shoulder colliding with her ribcage to drive her back into the shelves opposite. An explosion of glass and choking gases, and Fritha danced back from the pooling liquids. Sendai was thrashing at her feet, screaming as the poisons ate through armor and flesh with equal ferocity. Fritha left her there, already at the frame and fumbling at the manacles that suspended cellophane beneath, the girl nearly buckling under the sudden weight of his body, until he found his own strength and took it from her. She kept an arm about him all the same, trying to support him upon the quaking stone tiles without touching the lesions that covered his bared chest, his back a bloody hatching she did not even wish to contemplate. He tried a smile, peering at her through swollen eyelids.
I knew you would come."
Behind them, Sendai had stopped screaming, her whimpers fading away to just the wheezing pant of a woman who knew she could count her last breaths, mangled legs a gory, useless mess below her waist.
"We were to be gods upon the earth, the 5 most powerful Ballspawn elevated to the greatest of his generals, just as my mother had promised. For decades, I suffered down there, clinging to my cursed divinity, my birthright, only to be murdered here by you."
Fritha just shook her head, trying to stem the blood from her broken nose. They had not the time, and yet,
"I am sorry. Even for those who would ascend in tyranny, I am beginning to think all us children got a raw deal. Save your pity for yourself."
The woman snarled,
"What army could have matched the one Balthazar's gathers but my own?" "Balthazar!"
cried Fritha, knees braced and taking Solophane's weight as a stronger shudder shook the room.
"He gathered his forces only to protect the monastery from you and Melissan." "What could it be? Fool!"
Sendai cackled weakly,
"It is Balthazar. He is the last of the 5, and the worst of us. He gathers an army to the east not to march on me, but the whole of Tethur. He plans to kill all who have the essence, from the greatest down to every worthless peasant with but a drop of black blood. He will start a war and murder thousands in his duty to purge this taint from Faerun." "His cure,"
Fritha breathed. Sendai nodded, arms trembling under her own weight, and at last she collapsed back into the glittering shards beneath her.
"Face him as you must save Tethur, if you can. And kill Melissan. Revenge me of her."
Fritha nodded, feeling that power within the woman as it bayed for its release, just waiting to engulf her. A hand snapped about Solophane's wrist.
Stay alive, Sendai! Stay alive as long as you can!
Fritha tore along quaking corridors, Solophane dragged after her in a desperation that overwhelmed the pity for his injuries that twisted her heart. Around the last corner, and ahead the main doors swung into view, both thrown open upon the wide crumbling bridge.
Come on!
She willed herself faster, dodging bodies and cracks even as the stonework fractured beneath her feet. Through the hail of falling rocks, she could see the opposite ledge and the stairs they first climbed down, intact for now.
Go on, you first,
she commanded, pushing the man before her. Solophane made no answer, his flagging energies saved for the climb, and Fritha took one last glance back. Half the fortress was gone, collapsed into the depths below, great shards of rock raining from the cavern above to bombard the remains like a siege weapon. Up they climbed, the worn stone steps shaking under screaming legs, until at last they reached that first plateau, deserted now, cool air carrying the scent of smoke from the black passage mouth.
Come, the quarry's this way.
Solophane was waning, the man cursing quietly in his own tongue and trying to keep running through sheer anger alone. A dozen or so yards along the fissure the passage opened to a cavern, the few lamps casting the hewn walls in flickering yellow light. The makeshift scaffolding had already collapsed, the ground scattered with bodies, dead guards surrounded by dead miners. It had cost them dearly, but the slaves had finally risen up. A great rumble from the passage behind, the thunder of collapsing stone and the quaking about them intensified.
Quickly!
Fritha raced over the littered ground, pulling the stumbling drow after her. The passage began again on the other side, the slope upwards easier, worn smooth by the tramp of countless feet. A turn in the tunnel, and light opened the way above, an irregular white pane that it hurt to look upon. Fritha quickened her pace, they were almost there. As one, they stumbled into the light, Solophane clinging to her arm like a drunk. The clearing was empty, the temple standing silent opposite the destroyed camp. Solophane fell to his knees but a few paces from the cliff face, panting in the dirt. The sudden release of her body left Fritha just as unsteady, and she collapsed to the ground beside him with a tremble of laughter. The blinding relief had brought tears to her eyes, the smile she sent Solophane her last conscious act before oblivion claimed her. End of chapter.